We now move on to Marilena Iannidinardi's talk on interpreting for the EU. Marilena is Deputy Head of the English and Irish Unit at the European Commission's Interpreting Service, and she interprets from French, Italian, Spanish, and German into English. She grew up in an Italian and English-speaking family, studied French and Italian at the University of Leeds, and after teaching English in France, returned to Leeds for a master's in interpreting and translating. She passed the EU accreditation tests in 2004 and worked as a freelance interpreter until 2008, when she joined the staff after passing an open competition. She was appointed to a current role in March 2022. In her talk, Marilena will give us an overview of trends in interpretation at the European Commission, including recruitment needs and the profile being sought, and she will touch on the current challenges facing the conference interpreting profession. Crucially, she will clarify a common misconception. While staff positions do require EU nationality, around half of interpreting work at the Commission is carried out by freelancers with no nationality restrictions for freelance accreditation. The EU actively recruits interpreters from the UK and beyond. Just to let everyone know, there are supporting documents for this presentation, which you will find in the materials tab on your screen that you can download from there. Marilena, great to have you here. Are you in an interpreting booth at the moment, and how are you doing? Okay, so we'll now pass over the controls to you.
Yes, I am indeed. Thank you. Thank you very much, Dom. I am in an interpreting booth, as you can see. I'm just going to get my presentation up already. And
Fantastic.
then if you can just tell me if you can see it.
I will do just as soon as we can see it.
Okay, sorry.
No worries.
Right, hopefully.
Okay, yep. So if you want to turn on presenter mode, that we see your presentation. Fantastic.
Okay, great. Thank you. Sorry, despite being multitaskers and being very kind of digital literate, we still struggle with these things. Thank you very much, Dom, as I said, for the introduction. Indeed, my name is Marilena Iannidinardi from DG SCIC. I'm Deputy Head of the English and Irish Unit. And I have a brief presentation that I'd like to give, covering some of the points that Dom mentioned in his introduction. And I hope kind of to stick to half an hour really tops, and then leave time for questions. Also, I do apologize. I am in an interpreting booth because I am actually interpreting in the booth alongside this event. So unfortunately, I've not been able to join the rest of the events. I caught the end of the last intervention, which was certainly very interesting. So I apologize. I'm going to have to dash out after our session is finished. But of course, Dom, the same goes for me as for the previous speaker. Any follow-up, I'm happy to kind of do in writing. So just a brief introduction about DG SCIC. You probably know that in the EU institutions, we are fond of acronyms, and some of them are quite opaque. And DG SCIC at first sight probably seems quite opaque as well. We are also known as DG Interpretation, which gives the game away somewhat. But just as a bit of background, SCIC comes from the French acronym because we are the Joint Interpreting and Conferencing Service. So we're the European Commission's Interpreting Service and Conferencing Service. And as you can see from the slide there are three kind of main missions to our DG. One, interpretation, but then also conference organization and meeting space management. But interpretation is by far the biggest proportion of our activity. It's the biggest directorate in the DG, and that's our core business really. So that was just to give you a bit of background. Also, before I start, let me just say, obviously I represent DG SCIC, so the European Commission, but I will be talking more generally as well about interpreting for the EU institutions. I'll come on to this in more detail later, but if you are accredited as a freelance interpreter for the EU, it's actually an interinstitutional test, which means that you put on a database and you are recruitable for the three institutions that are part of that interinstitutional test, which is DG SCIC, so the Commission, the European Parliament, and the European Court of Justice. So whilst the three institutions have their own individual interpreting services and they do their recruitment separately, as a freelance interpreter, you are accredited for all three, and in theory, you can work for all three. Now, the institutions differ in terms of size, in terms of interpreting needs, in terms of interpreting profiles. So some of the things that I say will be specific to DG SCIC, and others will be kind of more general across the board for the EU institutions, but I'll try and make that very clear in the points that I raise. And then just another thing that I'd like to say before I get into the presentation proper. So I'm from the English and Irish unit, and indeed my presentation will focus first and foremost on English native speakers, so English A's. And then within English A, we also have the Irish stream. There are different needs across the different language units, both within DG SCIC and across the three institutions. I won't necessarily be bringing that input to this presentation, but I can certainly kind of as a follow-up answer questions on those later, and I can certainly put you in touch with heads of unit for other language units if that's if that's the information that you're looking for. But just to point out that I really am coming at this from an English A perspective. So in terms of the EU institutions and the EU project in general, multilingualism extremely important at the very heart of it since the very beginning, since 1958. It's in the EU treaties that everybody has the right to be heard in their own language. And there's also a reference to the EU's respect for cultural, religious and linguistic diversity. And then the motto of the EU, of course, that we are united in diversity, and that includes also linguistic diversity. And then just at the bottom of that slide, you'll see the comparison there between the EU that has 24 official languages versus one of the other big, or the next big international organization, the United Nations, which only has 6 official languages. That's just to show you kind of the weight, the proportion of languages and how multilingualism is a really big thing across the EU. Now, the other thing I should say and point out very clearly from the outset is that for the EU, we are looking at conference interpretation, conference interpreters. That's what we look for. And obviously there are other areas and sectors of interpretation that are, that also are very worthy, that have their own place, be it public sector interpreting or medical interpreting, liaison or business interpreting. But in the EU, we focus on conference interpreting only. So the multilingual meetings, the big meetings, and within the EU, we work mainly in 3 modes. By far, the bulk of our work is in simultaneous interpretation. So in the booths, like in this one, where you're working in real time. We also, however, do work in consecutive mode. So taking notes, listening to the speech, taking notes, then giving back our interpretation afterwards. It's not so widespread, mainly because of the time it takes, but there are times when interpretation booths aren't available, or gala dinners or big events where consecutive is still called upon. And then we also have chuchotage or whispered interpretation, which quite often actually blurs with the consecutive interpretation as well. More often than not used in kind of bilateral meetings at all levels between, heads of state and government, or, in terms of farming audits, things like that. So they're the 3 main modes of interpretation that we deal with across the EU. Now, going back more specifically to DG SCIC, we are actually the biggest employer of interpreters in terms of volume of interpretation days. And second to us is the European Parliament. Now, I think partly that's because, as I mentioned before, 24 official languages, first and foremost, but also if you look at this slide, it shows that DG SCIC doesn't just service the European Commission for interpretation services. They're our first client in terms of our own institution, but we also serve the Council of the European Union, which is a sister institution. And in fact, that's where I'm sitting at the moment. I'm in the Council building, the Justice Lipsius building in Brussels. We service the Council for their regular working parties. We service them right the way up the chain to ministerial meetings, and they're the European Council, which are the heads of state and governments and the summits. We also actually service and offer interpretation to some of the other committees, so the Committee of the Regions and the European Economic and Social Committee that are here present in Brussels as well, then the European Investment Bank, and then also some other agencies and bodies in the member states. So our client base, if I can put it like that, is much broader. The Parliament focuses on Parliament only, whereas we at DG SCIC actually service meetings held by other institutions as well. This slide just gives you an idea of the volume. So about 1,200 interpreters assigned to 40 meetings in Brussels on most working days. Most interpreters can interpret from 4 passive languages into their mother tongue, but you do have outliers, I think, like you do everywhere. Some can even interpret from up to 9 languages, and I'm always in awe of people with a string of languages to their bow. We have about 200 staff interpreters who also work in Ritour language, so they work into a B language and not just into their mother tongue. Now, this is just a kind of a visual representation of what I've just mentioned about where might interpreters work. Our work is varied. You can be in different working parties, you can be in different conferences on different topics from one day to the next. And I think that's part and parcel of the excitement of the job that we do. It's not a 9-to-5 regular routine kind of job. You know, you can be jumping around from topic to topic, and it keeps you on your toes. And just a photo on that slide there of the summit in what's affectionately known here in Brussels as the Elmer room. For anybody who maybe has children or who've read the Elmer the Elephant books, you'll know why when you look at the picture. So in terms of the ways we work, I told you about the 3 main modes that we work in, but our working methods and arrangements have changed somewhat. Partly spurred on by COVID and partly spurred on by technological developments in general, I think. So once over, we would only ever work in fully in-person meetings. That's to say everybody, participants, delegates and interpreters, all present in the same room, and the meeting goes ahead. But as I said, since COVID, things have changed. We now also have hybrid meetings. So you have participants, some join virtually, and then some are in the room, and the interpreters are in the interpreting booths in the room and joined up by some kind of interpreting platform. Or you can also have fully remote meetings where all participants basically join the meetings virtually and the interpreters are in the booths in a meeting room so that we have our consoles and our equipment and the sound coming into us, and so that the sound going out is also standard. So you can see that things have changed somewhat, basically linked to the way things have changed in the world since COVID. Now, moving on to kind of how people can work for us as interpreters. And this slide really summarizes the options. So an interpreter can either be a permanent member of staff. In our jargon, we call them officials, like me. I passed an open competition, I took up my post as an official, and I've been working ever since. Or they can be temporary agents who on a legal footing are akin to officials. They have the same status, but as the name suggests, it's a temporary contract, so it's a fixed set contract. And then on the other side of the picture, we have our freelance interpreters. And in order to be a freelance interpreter, you have to have passed the interinstitutional accreditation test, which I referred to right at the beginning of the presentation. Now, I'm going to move on, and I'm going to say already at this stage that I am not going to come back to the option of permanent staff. And here, my second disclaimer kind of really comes into play. I've mentioned changing working conditions. I've mentioned changes to the way people do business since COVID, but it will have escaped nobody's attention that actually the world is changing at the moment at a rapid pace, not least because of the geopolitical situation. And the European institutions are also not immune to this change. So at the moment, what I can say is the European Commission and this is at corporate level, this is kind of institutional level, but all of the European institutions are going through a time of transformation and change and restructuring as well. The European budget, just like national budgets, is coming under scrutiny. It's being tightened. Everything is being streamlined. And so we are actually undergoing what's called a large-scale review. So that's one part of the disclaimer. We are streamlining, if I can put it like that. The other part of the disclaimer is that because of the changing geopolitical situation and the shifting political priorities, although multilingualism will remain a key priority, we are seeing, nevertheless, a shift away from certain policy areas to focus on defence. And that specifically also in terms of staffing levels. So all of this is kind of a bit of a convoluted way of saying that actually, given the current situation, from what we know, we do not expect there to be any kind of permanent staff openings, certainly not in the English and Irish unit anytime soon, which is why I'm not going to come back to it. The other reason as well for not dwelling on the permanent staff option is what Dom mentioned at the beginning, that there is also a nationality requirement. If you want to be eligible to sit an open competition to become permanent staff, you have to hold the nationality of an EU member state, which sadly, as we all know since Brexit, is no longer the case for those who only hold British nationality. Whether that changes in the future, we don't know. And I just leave that open. But all of that just to explain that I'm not going to come back to this option of permanent staff. I'm going to focus very much on freelance interpreters and the opportunities for freelance interpreters. This slide really just highlights the differences, I suppose, or it kind of, it gives you at a glance the most important aspects. So in order to become accredited as a freelance interpreter, or an ACI, as we also call it in our jargon, you have to sit an accreditation test. If you pass the accreditation test, and I'll give you more details on that in a moment, you are then placed on a joint database, on a joint list, which will allow you to be recruited by any of the three institutions that I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation. The difference then as a freelance interpreter, and I'm sure you'll be aware of this, but I'll just go over it very quickly. It means that you are paid by the day. So contracts are given by the day. It means that you're only paid for the days you work. And of course, it means that there's no guarantee of how much work you will get. If there's work, you may be offered work. If there is no work, if it's a slack period and there's nothing happening, and a case in point of this is the month of August here in Brussels when things are pretty dead, then it's safe to say that as a freelance you won't get any work. I've put up there, of course, there is no nationality requirement for a freelance interpreter, which means that you can hold any nationality and still be eligible to sit the accreditation test. There are, however, other eligibility criteria, which I will come on to in a moment, which are very important. So basically, if you are just British, that is not in any way a hindrance to applying to sit the freelance accreditation test. Now, I've put a link on that slide there to a very useful web page that summarizes all this information for you, and I think it will be in the documentation as well that you'll be able to get after the presentation. So moving on to kind of the other eligibility criteria for freelance interpreters to be able to sit a test. So first of all, you need to have a university qualification in conference interpreting. And here, it's really, really important. I come back to what I said at the beginning, that we are looking for conference interpreters. So you have to have conference interpreter training in both consecutive and simultaneous. So that's one way in, that's one channel. Okay, so either a postgraduate diploma in conference interpreting or a master's in interpreting. It can be a joint master's in interpreting and translating, for example, like I did. but it has to be some kind of postgraduate qualification and training in conference interpreting. Or you can have, if you don't have the postgraduate qualification, it can be any university qualification. And then you need to have and to be able to prove 1 year's professional experience. And that too is extremely important. The professional experience has to be conference interpreting experience. Okay, I have to say that the majority of candidates that we get through applying to sit the accreditation tests don't come via the professional experience route. Most of them come with some kind of university qualification or a postgraduate qualification in conference interpreting. So that's the first formal part of the eligibility criteria. The other very, very important part of the eligibility criteria is what we call the language profile. Now, the language profile for the English and Irish unit is that you need English A plus 2 EU official languages. Now, for the English and Irish unit, it's language 1 has to be French or German, and language 2 can be any other EU official language. Okay, so in order to be eligible to be tested for the English and Irish unit, or the English stream, I should say, you would need to present English A with either French or German as language 1, and language 2, any other EU official languages. You would not be eligible, say, to present English A with Italian as language 1 and Spanish as language 2. Now, just a word on the language profiles. These are all available. They're published on the Europa website that I referred to on the last slide. They are set by the 3 heads of language unit from the 3 institutions together based on language needs of their unit. And they're normally set for a period of 2 years. That said, they can be changed after 1 year if necessary. What I can tell you is that for the English unit, at least, we haven't changed the profile for very many years. It has remained stable. And the reason it's remained stable is that we know that most graduates, most university students coming out of the UK and Irish universities come out with a maximum of 2 foreign languages. Ideally, we'd love to have people with 3 passive languages, but we know that the system is such that more often than not, they come out with 2. That 3rd passive language will be extremely important, however, particularly in terms of being recruited and getting work, but I'll come on to that in a moment. So I'd just like to bust a few myths again and kind of stress these points because we've been fighting against this for a while, but it's a reminder. Brexit is that big elephant in the room. It's that naughty word that nobody likes to mention still. Pre-Brexit, there were 28 member states, 24 official languages. Currently, 27 member states, still 24 official languages, including English. So English is still an official language of the EU. Okay, it's spoken by the Republic of Ireland, as well as Irish. And also I've put on there Malta as well. It's one of Malta's official languages too. So this is to debunk the myth that actually, well, the UK's left the EU, therefore there's no need for English. But actually, it is still an official language, and it's an important language still. It's a Commission working language along with French and German, which means that a lot of the policy drafting and the policy initiatives are taken from the outset in English. And I also have to say that it's already and still continues to be the language of choice for drafting of legislation, and it's often a lingua franca in big meetings. So English is still very important, and actually we hear it a lot. But, and this is the counterpoint to that, just to give you an idea. So these are the breakdown of meetings with interpretation from 2025. It's the most recent figures that I have. And you'll see that of all of the meetings that were held, 99% of those meetings with interpretation, 99% of those meetings had an English booth present. So Even though English is used a great deal as a lingua franca, as a drafting language, we are still very important, because when other foreign languages are spoken, we are absolutely essential. We are needed. And, you know, if there is no English booth available, then the meeting will not happen in the majority of cases. And this graph shows that, which is why I wanted to put it in. Now, another important point as to why I'm kind of here talking to you with all of the disclaimers that I mentioned at the beginning. Interpreters are an aging population in general, but certainly for native English speakers. I've put up there the most recent figures that I have. So the freelance average age in the English booth is 47, and the staff average age is 48. So quite old, if I may say so. And the projections that we have currently, by 2028, we will lose 30% of our staff in the English and Irish unit, and 15% of our freelance colleagues, which is pretty huge when you think about it, and particularly when you think about not just the number of people that will leave the profession, but the number of languages and the knowledge that they will take with them. So the wine glass there, that's not just because I'm craving a glass of wine on this Thursday afternoon. It's because one of my former heads of unit had a fondness for the wine glass imagery. So we've done a lot of work, outreach, since Brexit, because post-Brexit, we weren't kind of a completely inversed pyramid, but it was a lot worse. I mean, we were really top heavy in terms of the older members of the booth, both freelance and staff. We've done a lot of outreach. We've had new blood coming in, and now we're more of a wine glass. So, you know, the middle is kind of bulking out a bit more, but we still, with a long-term view, we still need renewal. We need new people coming in. We need, you know, people that will come in and kind of take over as the older generations kind of fall away. So in terms of a need, there is a need for English native speakers and also new interpreters. It is a more long-term need, though. It's not kind of critical like it was directly post-Brexit. But in terms of the long term, in terms of the number of interpreters that we have, we need to gradually renew. So the opportunities are there for freelance interpreters who are native English speakers. Now, the next few slides are really just to give you an idea of what kind of things we do, how we work to offer training assistance for interpreting students. DG SCIC cooperates with a number of universities in the UK and Ireland. We have contacts with a much broader spectrum of universities across the UK and Ireland. We offer pedagogical assistance, as we call it in our jargon, which means that we send our trainers out to university courses to offer kind of masterclasses or to offer feedback, to do outreach. We also offer that online. We participate as well in some of our partner universities' exams and have an input there in terms of meeting potential future interpreting candidates. We also offer training seminars for university trainers. And for some languages, we put together ad hoc training when we have specific language needs. So for example, this isn't a commission or a DG SCIC run initiative, but there will be a European Parliament Irish Academy taking place, I think from mid-May, and that's specifically focusing on Irish and the need for Irish. That's just an example of one of these ad hoc trainings for specific language needs. And then we also have and welcome student visits as well to Brussels. And then other forms of assistance, we offer grants to universities to support training and conference interpreting. They are grants for equipment mainly. We also offer bursaries for interpretation students. I think the current bursary is up to a maximum of €3,000 to help cover tuition fees. Unfortunately, those bursaries, however, do hold a nationality requirement. You have to hold the nationality of an EU member state to be eligible for that. The other two links on the slide there are just links to repositories of training material, speeches, different videos about different things, linked to the accreditation test, linked to the way we work, linked to practice speeches. And the Knowledge Centre on Translation and Interpretation is also a very useful resource, open to all as well, where you can find communities to exchange and pool knowledge and information in general on translation and interpreting issues. Now, I think this is my final slide, and it's just a roundup of you know, where you can find us and where you can follow us on our social media channels, and useful websites with useful information that's summarized. I'll go into more detail on some of the points that I've already raised in the presentation. But as I said, I also sent a more extensive list of useful links and websites that you can go to if you're interested in knowing more. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, that's the last slide. Indeed it is. So happy to take any questions now if there's time, or as I said, as a follow-up afterwards. And I hope I've stuck to the brief, and I hope I've stuck to time as well, Dom. Shall I stop sharing the screen? Would that be the best way of doing this now?
Hello there. I'm afraid I think Dom's got some technical issues. So yes, of course, Marilena, you can stop sharing your screen. That's fine. Yes, we've got a few questions that have come in. So let's start with, Louise asks, are EU institutions able to sponsor visas for freelancers to relocate to an EU country?
Yes, okay, indeed. I didn't touch upon this. The official answer to that is no. We don't have the power to do that. However, what we do have is a great deal of experience now built up through our freelance community. So we can certainly help in terms of producing documentation that you might need to submit as part of your application, but we can't officially sponsor any kind of visa application. But we have a collective kind of knowledge that we can tap into.
Okay, thank you. Do you have to live in Brussels to be an interpreter for the EU?
Yes. Now, I'm glad somebody's raised that question, because I realized looking at my notes that this is something that I forgot to mention. Indeed. So I said about, you know, the opportunities are mainly freelance opportunities. I also explained that the language profile for newcomers is 2 passive languages, but that actually preferably people starting out would have 3 passive languages. What I can say is, for DG SCIC, budgets are tight, and we are unable to recruit from outside Brussels unless absolutely necessary, and that would normally be only if we have a specific language need.
Okay.
Now, for the European Parliament, I know that's different. So it could be that the European Parliament and the Court of Justice do things differently. They have a different budget, but for DG SCIC, yes, you would have to be based in Brussels.
Okay, thank you. And is there an age limit for applying?
No. So there's no official age limit for applying, but here too, a point where DG SCIC differs from the other institutions. DG SCIC has a cutoff for working as a freelance at age 67.
Okay, all right, that's very good to know. What other question do we have? How will the EU continue to operate multilingually if there are fewer permanent staff?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question, and thank you. Dom mentioned already the ideal ratio, and the ratio that we have at the moment between staff and freelance is kind of 50-50. So staff cover 50% of the work, and our ACIs cover 50% of the work. If if the staff can't cover 50%, and if the budget will allow, which is I think what we would be working on, it could mean that the ACI ratio would go up to compensate. So again, I have no crystal ball. I can't say for certainty, I can't guarantee anything, but that's certainly our thinking would be that if, you know, once the staff drops off, if we can't get extra posts to replace people that are leaving, then it would be the ACI ratio of recruitment that would go up.
Okay, thank you. One other question we have here, does the EU Commission do service for other foreign languages aside from the major top A to 5 lingua franca working languages?
So yes, so we have what's called the Big Five, which is French, Italian, Spanish, German, and French, Italian, Spanish, German, and Dutch, I think it is. Of course, all official languages are used, but not all the time. Logistically, it wouldn't be possible, but also depending on what kind of meeting you're in, it could be that certain languages are more needed than others. So we do, certainly for the Council of the European Union, for the ministerials, for the summit, we have a full language regime in place. Otherwise, yeah, the Big Five are the ones that are kind of the first, how can I call it? It's kind of the first level that are generally always asked for, although Dutch these days not quite so much as it used to be. But yeah, all languages are asked for and can be used. And then it depends on the internal rules of procedure for each committee. Sometimes they have different agreements as to which languages can be requested and which can't. The presidency language is usually one that's always offered. So at the moment, Greek for Cyprus. And then just in relation to that, I don't know if the question was to do more with non-EU languages. So we do also have a limited number of meetings that take place with languages like Russian, Arabic, Chinese. But the recruitment for those languages is done slightly differently.
Okay. All right, thank you. There's one other question regarding working in the English booth. So could you work in the English booth even if you were born in another EU country, but you've lived in the UK for most of your life?
Yes, so not so much to do with where you're born,
so that doesn't matter.
No, as to what your mother tongue is.
Right.
And indeed, there are people with dual A's, you know, with more than one mother tongue. I think that's something that that you'd have to kind of look at yourself and yeah. All I will say is if you are tested as an English A, you will be assessed as an English A, even if your English is a very good English B.
Okay. All right, thank you. And then just lastly, we've got two questions regarding, can you recommend where to study conference interpreting? And then obviously connected to that, what are your thoughts on, are you worried about languages being cut out of university courses?
Yes, I mean, I can't make any recommendations in terms of places to study. I can tell you who we cooperate with, and in the UK we cooperate with Bath, Heriot-Watt, and in Ireland it's Galway. Now, so Bath and Heriot-Watt are what we call official partner universities, but we cooperate also with Leeds, with London Met as well. In terms of languages being cut, yes, this is something which is of huge concern to us at the moment, and to me in particular, because part of my remit as Deputy Head of Booth is dealing with contacts with universities and pedagogical assistants. And I am seeing across the board in the UK, universities are really struggling against their university administrations in terms of resources, in terms of keeping courses afloat. We continue to do as much outreach as we can. We continue to kind of try and explain why these courses are so important for our needs and our future needs. But we realise it's really not, it's not easy at the moment for universities in the UK. The only other thing I wanted to say about universities, there is also something called the EMCI Consortium, which is a consortium of European universities that put together a European Masters in Conference Interpreting. You can, if you put it in Google, you'll find it. If you go to the Europa website, which is the Commission's website, you'll also find it if you wanted to look at universities outside of the UK and Ireland, say, as well.
Okay then, well, thank you so much, Marilena. That was a fascinating talk.